The baby stopped crying only because she had no tears left. Her tiny chest rose and fell in shallow, shaky breaths, each one weaker than the last. The sun was brutal above them, a white-hot blade slicing the world in half, and the dirt road shimmered as if the earth itself were melting. Tiao Bento tightened his grip on the cloth-wrapped bundle in his arms, whispering to his daughter, even though he knew she was too exhausted to hear him. "We're close, Natsa. Just hold on, Phila." But even he didn't believe it anymore. Behind him, his two boys struggled to keep pace. Dito dragged his feet, clutching a battered tin cup against his chest, staring ahead with the blank focus of a child trying not to cry. Nico stumbled every few steps, one hand pressed to his forehead, as if he could push the heat away by force. Their clothes were stiff with dust, their lips cracked like old clay, and every part of them sagged under hunger and fear. They had been walking for 2 weeks through the Sertao, trying to outrun shame, hunger, and memory. But memory always kept pace. The road dipped, then rose again, and as Tiao reached the crest, he saw at a small clearing, a crooked wooden fence and a lonely farmhouse crouched under the blazing sky. Behind it stood a stone well shaded by an acacia tree. He froze. For a heartbeat, he wondered if the heat had finally broken his mind. A well. Real water. His throat tightened until he could barely breathe. "Pai!" Dito croaked, pointing with a trembling hand. "Water, maybe," Tio whispered. "Maybe meu filho." But hope was dangerous. Hope was what had ruined him the first time. He shifted Naza on his shoulder, wiped sweat from his brow, and forced himself forward. Each step felt like it might be his last. When they reached the fence, he rested one hand on it, steadying himself as the world spun. A woman was pulling a bucket up from the well, a young woman heavy-set with broad shoulders and a body shaped by work. Thick black hair was tied under a faded headscarf, and her brown skin shone with sweat. Her arms flexed with quiet strength as she hauled the rope, her breath steady, her movements practiced. She didn't see them at first. Tiao swallowed hard. His heart pounded so hard he thought she might hear it. Asking for water shouldn't have been humiliating. But after everything, after Zinha, after the whispers, after men laughing behind their hands and calling him weak, there was a part of him that would rather die thirsty than beg again. But his children would not survive pride. He stepped forward, removing his hat with a shaking hand. "Mosa," he called, voice cracking like dry wood. "Please, forgive the bother." "Do you have clean water for us to drink?" That line, the one he had never imagined himself saying, hung in the hot, still air like a confession. She stopped. Slowly, she turned to face him. Her eyes widened. She took in the baby, gasping for breath, the boys drooping with exhaustion, the father standing as if he might collapse at her feet. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The bucket dripped onto the dirt, each drop a tiny promise. Finally, she said quietly, firmly, "I don't know who you are, but I know what need looks like." She lifted the bucket and walked toward him, her steps heavy but sure. When she reached the boys, she crouched, dipped a gourd into the water, and held it to Dito's lips. "Drink, menino. Slow. Easy now." The boy obeyed, shaking so hard, the water sloshed over his chin. When she handed the gourd to Neko, he gulped so fast, she had to gently steady his head. Tiao's throat tightened with something that was not thirst anymore. "Thank you," he whispered, barely audible. "God bless you, Moza." She stood meeting his eyes with a directness that startled him. "My name is Kabia," she said. "What's yours, Tiao Bento?" She nodded once decisively, as if she had already made up her mind about something. "Give me the baby," she said. He stiffened. instinct, fear. But her face was open serious, and her hands were steady as stone. After a moment's hesitation, he carefully placed Naza in her arms. Kabia poured a little water onto a clean cloth and touched it to the baby's lips. Naza sucked weakly, then let out a sound half-gasp, half-whimper, and relaxed against the stranger's chest. Kabia exhaled, relieved. She's dehydrated, but she's strong. She'll make it. Tiao felt his knees buckle. He grabbed the fence to steady himself, the world suddenly too bright. "You all haven't eaten, have you?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "No," he admitted. "Not today, not yesterday." She jerked her chin toward her house. "Come. I'll find you something. We don't want to trouble you." "You're not," she cut in her tone, brooking no argument. "Come." The boys exchanged startled glances, then followed. Tiao walked behind Kabia, watching the way she held Naza, not like a burden, but like something precious. Inside the small kitchen, Kabia served them farina and beans, simple but warm. The boys devoured the food, as if afraid it might vanish. Tiao ate slowly, almost reverently. When he finished, he wiped his mouth, blinked hard, and tried to speak, but instead a tear slid down his cheek. Kabia saw it. She didn't comment. She only said, "There's an empty hut behind the house. You can sleep there tonight." Tiao bowed his head, ashamed of the relief flooding him. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't know how to repay. You don't owe me," she said. "Not for water, not for food." Something inside him cracked at those words. Something old and bruised and desperate. He gathered his children and stepped outside. The sky was turning ember red, the wind cooling at last. The sound of the well's rope creaking drifted through the quiet. For the first time in months, he let himself believe the night might pass without fear. Yet as he settled the boys into their blankets, a thought gnawed at him: what happens tomorrow? He didn't know, but Kabia, standing by the well with the fading sun behind her, looked like someone who might. And that possibility, that tiny, impossible hope, carried him into the night. Kabia stood in the doorway of the hut just as the first silver threads of morning crept across the sky. Her hands were wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, her eyes fixed on the sleeping figures inside. Dito was curled up tightly beside Neko, their arms and legs entangled in the way only siblings sleep safe again for the first time in weeks. On the floor near the door, Tiao was half awake, sitting against the wall with baby Naza nestled on his chest, wrapped in the same faded cloth. He blinked up at Kabia, eyes still swollen from exhaustion, and tried to speak. She beat him to it. "There's more food inside. Not much, but it'll fill your bellies." He nodded hoarse. "Thank you." She tilted her head. "You always say that like it hurts your mouth." Tiao lowered his eyes. "It does. I've had to beg too many times to forget the taste." She said nothing for a moment, then turned. "Well, come eat anyway. No one's keeping count here." He laid the baby down gently on a folded blanket, checked her breathing, then followed Kabia toward the house. The morning air was dry but not cruel. The smell of boiled beans and cassava hung heavy, and Tiao's stomach growled before he even sat down. She handed him a wooden bowl without ceremony. He muttered thanks again, quieter this time. Kabia sat across from him, resting her elbows on the table. For a while they ate in silence, the only sound being the scrape of wooden spoons and the occasional call of a distant bird. "You walked far," she said finally. Tiao nodded. "With 3 children, no cart, no mule, just that little donkey and 2 feet full of pain." He looked up. There was no pity in her tone, just fact. Observation. He cleared his throat. We came from a village 3 valleys west of here. I used to work carpentry. Then he stopped himself. Then everything changed. She didn't press him. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and said, I've seen men like you pass by before. Most don't stop. They're too proud, or too desperate. He didn't know which he had been. I didn't stop, he said quietly. Not until I had no other choice. Kabia studied him, and something in her face softened. I don't know who you are, she said, repeating the words she'd spoken yesterday, but I know what need looks like. Tiao felt the words land deeper this time. Yesterday they'd sounded like kindness. Today they sounded like understanding. You live here alone, he asked. I do. No family. My folks died 3 years back. Fever took my mother. My father followed not long after. She paused. I stayed. This land's all I've got. It's good land, he said reflexively, the eyes drifting out toward the dry stretch of earth surrounding the well. It's tired land, she replied. It works hard like me. Like you, I suppose. He didn't respond to that. He just stared into his bowl as if it might hold the rest of his future. Footsteps scuffed at the door. Dito and Neko appeared, rubbing their eyes. Naza was in Dito's arms, fussing softly. Kabia rose, took the baby, and began heating water. She needs a real wash, she muttered. Poor thing smells like 12 days of road and misery. I would have, Tiao began, but Kabia waved him off. Let me help. You got bigger things to worry about. She bathed the baby with care, humming something slow and melodic under her breath, a tune without words. Naza grew still in her arms, eyes wide, tiny hands reaching up to touch Kabia's cheek. She likes you, Tiao said. I'm warm and I smell like beans, Kabia said with a crooked smile. Dito came to stand beside Tiao. She sang to Naza, he whispered. Tiao nodded slowly. He'd noticed. He'd also noticed that his daughter had slept better last night than she had in weeks. The day wore on. Tiao helped chop firewood. Dito and Neko fetched water from the well and tried to make themselves useful. Kabia cooked again at noon, serving them without fuss, treating them not like charity, but like neighbors, maybe even like family. That evening, Tiao sat on the back step, watching the horizon bleed into gold. Kabia joined him, arms folded across her chest. You ever plan on going back there? She asked. To the village, he shook his head. No. They buried me alive when she left. Your wife Zinha. Kabia didn't speak for a while. Then she said, Men leave women all the time, but when it's the other way around. Tiao chuckled bitterly. They say I wasn't man enough to keep her, that I must have been weak, that I let her go. Kabia turned her head toward him. Were you? No, he said. I didn't let her go. She tore herself loose, chose silks and silver over tin plates and tired hands. Kabia nodded slowly. Some people only see shine. He looked at her, then really looked. She was broad-shouldered, sturdy, with skin kissed deep by sun and smoke. No shine, just strength. She surprised him again. You need a place to stay, she said, and I need help around this place. His brow furrowed. You mean, there's a hut out back. You already know it's got a roof. This land it can grow if worked right. I can't manage it alone. You stay, you work, we split the harvest fare. No strings. Tiao's chest tightened. The offer was too clean, too generous. But why Kabia stared ahead? Because my father taught me when you have, and someone else doesn't, you share. That's how the world don't rot. He didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything at all. Inside, the children were laughing, real laughter like children should. Dito was trying to teach Neko how to spell his name in the dirt using a stub of charcoal Kabia had found. Tiao began, but she stopped him. Think on it. I ain't going anywhere. He did think all night. At dawn, he was already working clearing brush from the fence line. Kabia came out with coffee and stood beside him. You decided then, he nodded, sweat already beading on his forehead. I'll work. You'll see. She passed him the cup. I already do. And as the sun broke over the dry fields, something in Tiao broke too, not in pain, but in quiet, cautious hope. Tomorrow he'd start rebuilding what he lost. And Kabia. She'd start believing that not all men leave. They didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath them was already shifting. Just over the hill, someone else had noticed the smoke of Kabia's chimney, someone who remembered her refusal and didn't forgive it. Zé Balbino was watching, and he was waiting. The sound of a hammer striking wood echoed through the early afternoon heat. Tiao stood at the edge of the clearing repairing a broken section of fence. His shirt clung to his back with sweat hands, blistered fingers wrapped in makeshift cloth. Every nail he drove into the sun-dried wood was like a heartbeat, steady, repetitive, necessary. This was work he understood, not like people, not like the pain that lingered in the back of his throat when he thought too long about Zinha. Kabia brought water in a clay jug and leaned on the fence watching him. Already patched 3 posts, she said. Before lunch, I like to keep busy. I noticed. She handed him the jug, and as he drank, she said quietly, You don't talk much when you work. He wiped his mouth and looked out at the horizon. Too much time in my head. I try to drown it out with noise. Noise like nails. He offered a tired smile. It helps. She was about to say something else when Neko came running from the house barefoot and dusty his face a mix of worry and excitement. Pai. There's a man coming down the road. Big hat. Riding slow. Tiao stiffened immediately. Kabia's expression shifted. Without a word, she and Tiao walked to the edge of the clearing. Dust rose in lazy clouds behind a rider on a mule. He wore a long, stained duster, and even from a distance, Tiao saw the glint of something sharp, a knife on his belt, or maybe just the eyes beneath that brim. As he drew closer, Kabia muttered, Zé Balbino. The name was enough to make Tiao's hands curl into fists. Zé reined in the mule right outside the fence and looked down at the pair of them, smirking. Well, well, you've taken in strays now, Kabia. Kabia didn't flinch. He's working. The fence needed mending. Zé spat into the dirt. Looks like you finally got yourself a man. Took long enough. Tiao said nothing. His silence wasn't submission, it was calculation. His eyes didn't leave Zé's face. Zé scanned the yard, noticed the children peeking from the doorway, and clicked his tongue. 3 kids. That's a whole litter. And you're feeding 'em too. What do you want? Zé Kabia's voice was low and flat. Just checking in. You know how folks talk. Saw smoke from your chimney. Thought maybe you needed a reminder that some things don't change. Tiao took a step forward. What exactly are you reminding her of? Zé grinned without humor. That a woman alone don't stay alone long, and that promises made still count. Kabia's jaw clenched. You made offers. I said no, That's not a promise. You said no, then he said, eyes narrowing. Doesn't mean it'll stay no forever, not when vultures start circling. Tiao stepped between them. This ain't your land. You don't talk to her like that. Zay leaned on his saddle horn. Oh, I see. You're her watchdog now. What's your name, stranger? Tiao's voice was calm. Tiao Bento. Zay's brow lifted. From over the ridge, thought I recognized that sorry face. Heard your woman ran off with Arinos. Left you with your pants around your ankles. Something in Tiao snapped. He moved fast, faster than Zay expected, and in one swift motion yanked the man off his mule by the collar. Zay hit the dirt hard, his hat flying, his elbow scraping against rock. Watch your mouth, Tiao said. Next time I don't stop at pulling. Zay scrambled to his feet, red-faced and furious. You just made a mistake. So did you, Kabia said behind him, her voice sharp as steel. Coming here thinking I'm still scared of you. Zay dusted himself off and climbed back onto the mule. This ain't over. Neither is the fence, Kabia said, turning her back on him. Zay rode off, leaving behind a silence that buzzed louder than cicadas. Tiao turned to her. You okay? Kabia stared out at the horizon. He's been sniffing around since my father died. Thinks this land's for taking. Is it? She looked at him then, serious and defiant. Not while I'm breathing. Later that evening, Kabia sat alone on the back porch, peeling cassava while the sun slipped low. Tiao joined her, the kids already asleep, Naza curled in a basket, made soft with cloth. He'll be back, Tiao said. I know. And he's the kind who doesn't like being told no. She nodded. But I'm the kind who doesn't say yes when it ain't earned. He studied her. Her fingers moved fast and confident, but her shoulders were tense, eyes darker than usual. You ever think of leaving? He asked. I was born on this land. My mother died in that bed. My father carved that fence with his bare hands. I won't leave because a man with a big hat and no heart comes banging on my door. Tiao nodded, admiring her fierceness. But fear stirred in him all the same. He knew men like Zay, they didn't let go easy. They didn't lose quiet. You need to be careful. She smirked. You think I ain't? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Just don't face him alone next time. Her eyes softened then, that an offer. He shrugged. It's a promise. Kabia looked at him long and hard. Then she said, I'd rather beg the dirt than hear them call me the man she left. That's what you said yesterday. He nodded. And I meant it. Well, she said, standing, I never left anyone. And I don't plan to start now. As she went inside, Tiao stayed seated watching the stars emerge. The wind had shifted slightly. Cooler. Still full of dust, but maybe also full of change. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew this much: Zay Balbino wasn't gone. He was watching. And next time he wouldn't just come with words. From the dark tree line past the clearing, a figure watched the quiet house and waited. Because next time it wouldn't be a visit. It would be a threat. Zay Balbino didn't return the next day, or the day after. But Tiao knew better than to relax. The man hadn't left in defeat, he'd left in calculation. Tiao had seen that kind of silence before. It wasn't peace. It was pressure building behind a dam, just waiting for the right moment to flood everything. And so he worked harder. He and Kabia mended every section of the fence, reinforced the chicken coops, and fixed the shutters on the windows. Dito and Neko collected stones to line the garden beds, helping in every small way they could. Even little Naza, now strong enough to toddle a few steps, tottered around the yard under Kabia's watchful eye, her giggles offering small moments of light. But at night, Tiao lay awake listening. Every creak of the wind, every owl's call, every distant hoofbeat stirred a flicker of anxiety. He wasn't just protecting his children anymore. He was guarding something larger, something that felt like the start of a life he didn't dare name yet. One morning, as he carried a load of cut wood toward the house, he found Mai Jurema waiting by the well. She was short, wide-hipped, with a face like weathered leather, and eyes that had seen too much. Her cane was carved from a twisted tree root, and she tapped it twice on the stones as she watched him approach. "Didn't expect visitors this early," Tiao said carefully. "I come when spirits stir the dust," she replied. "And the dust has been loud lately." He offered her water, which she took in silence, sipping slowly, before fixing him with her hawk's gaze. "You're the one Zinha left," she said, as blunt as a fist. Tiao stiffened. "I am. You've got ghosts hanging off your back like wet clothes. You think staying quiet keeps them still. But ghosts don't care about silence." He nodded once, not denying it. Jurema pointed toward the house. "Kabia's a strong woman, stronger than many men I've buried. But strength can't hold off all kinds of hunger. And Zé Balbino, he's the kind that don't eat with a spoon. He bites, I know." She tilted her head. "Then you better sharpen your teeth too." Tiao looked past her toward the barn where Kabia was feeding the goats. She had one hip cocked, a baby goat in her arms, and her braid swinging down her back. "I'm trying," he said. "You'll have to do more than try, Philo. You'll have to decide." He frowned. "Decide what, if you're staying?" "Truly, not just with your feet, but with your heart." Before he could answer, Kabia spotted them and waved. Jurema waved back, then leaned in close to Tiao. "You think it's only men who fight for land? You're wrong. Women fight too, sometimes harder. But they don't need swords. They need someone who won't run when the sky turns black." With that, she turned and walked off, cane tapping rhythmically against the ground. That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Kabia poured herself a mug of roasted corn tea and sat beside Tiao on the porch. The moon was high, the stars thick and heavy above them. "She told you, didn't she?" Kabia said. He nodded. "She sees everything. She warned me about Zay the day after my father was buried. Said he'd come sniffing. And he did." Tiao hesitated, then asked, "What happened between you two?" Kabia stared into the trees. "My father owed his brother money. Land debts. Zay offered to pay it off in exchange for marrying me." Tiao's jaw clenched. "You were supposed to pay your family's debt with your freedom." Kabia smiled bitterly. "It's a common currency around here. Fat girl with no dowry." No one thought twice. "What did you say?" I said no. Loud enough that he left with a bloody lip. Tiao couldn't help it. He smiled. "I would have paid to see that." Kabia's grin softened. "I didn't mean to become someone's problem. I just didn't want to be bought." "You're not a problem," he said. "You're the reason we're not dead in a ditch somewhere." They sat in silence for a while. Then she asked if he comes back, and I mean really comes back. "You gonna run?" Tiao turned to her, his voice steady. "No. I'm done running." She studied his face. "Even if it means fighting. Even if it means bleeding." A long silence passed between them. Then she said, almost to herself, "I don't need a man to save me. But it's good to have one who won't throw me to the wolves." The next day was hot. oppressively so, the kind of heat that pressed on the chest like grief. But the children were in good spirits, and Tiao felt lighter than he had in months. Until he found the letter. It was nailed to the front post, scrawled in red clay on scrap wood. "This land don't belong to you. You or him. Leave now or it burns." Kabia read it once, then twice, eyes unreadable. Dito's voice cracked, scared. "Who left that?" Kabia didn't answer right away. Then she looked up and said calmly, "We're not leaving." Kabia Tiao began, but she cut him off. "No, I'm not running from men like Zay. I never did, and I won't start now." "Then we prepare," he said. They didn't sleep that night. Tiao kept watch with a sharpened axe by the doorway. Kabia moved the children's bedding to the center room away from the windows. Every noise outside was a threat. Every breeze could carry flame. But nothing came. Not yet. Morning broke slow and smoky. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk screamed. Kabia stood on the porch with her arms crossed, eyes locked on the road. "If this is his warning," she said, "then war's coming next." And from just beyond the ridge, Zé Balbino smiled, because he wasn't planning to knock on the door again. Next time he'd bring matches. The fire never came, but the silence that followed the threat was worse. Every day after the note, Tiao checked the fences twice. He walked the perimeter before the sun rose, and again so after it fell, ears tuned to the faintest crack of a twig. Kabia moved with the same alertness, never showing fear, but never letting her guard down either. She didn't speak of the note again. She didn't need to. It was etched behind every glance, every extra minute spent sharpening tools or double-locking the back door. Zay hadn't struck yet, but he'd taken their peace. And peace was hard-earned out here. By the third day, Kabia had had enough of waiting. She brought a stool outside and placed it dead center in the yard. The morning sun wasn't even high yet, but the dust was already hot enough to stick to the skin. Kabia sat down with her arms crossed, facing the road. When Tiao came around the corner carrying a sack of cornmeal, he stopped short. "What are you doing?" he asked. She didn't move. Waiting. For what? For him. Tiao frowned. "You think he'll come while you're sitting in plain sight?" "I hope he does," she said, "so I don't waste any more hours guessing where he'll show." Tiao dropped the sack with a thud. "We should be preparing. Fortifying." Not Kabia looked up, her voice even but sharp. "I'm not hiding, Tiao. I've done nothing wrong. This is my land, my home. I was born here. If Zay wants to threaten me, let him look me in the eye when he does it." He stared at her for a long moment, then sat beside her. "I don't like this," he muttered. "I don't either," she replied. "But I'm done living like I'm already defeated." Hours passed and no one came. But Kabia didn't flinch. Not when the wind kicked up sand into her eyes. Not when the chickens got restless. Not even when Dito called from the porch, asking if she wanted shade. By sundown, her skin was raw and her back ached, but she'd made her point. That night, Kabia didn't eat much. Tiao served the boys washed naza and cleared the table without asking. Kabia sat by the door with a mug of tea, looking out into the dark, like it was something she could read. Tiao sat beside her, elbows on his knees. "You don't owe me anything," she said suddenly. "Not for the water, not for the food, not for shelter." He turned to her. "Where's that coming from, huh?" Didn't look at him. "I've been thinking. About what happens next. If things get worse." "They will. And if they don't," she asked. "If he just waits and watches and makes us live scared, I'll still be here," Tiao said. "That doesn't change." Kabia finally met his eyes. "Then let's call it even. You help me, I give you a home. No debts, just survival. That's not enough for me, he said softly. She blinked. What I don't want to just survive, Tiao said. I want to build. I want to fix things, not just fences, but a future. Kabia stared at him like she was trying to decide if he meant it. Then she said, You don't even know what my future looks like. Then show me, he replied. The next morning, Kabia walked him down to a small plot of land behind the barn. It had once been a garden, now overgrown with weeds and dry grass. An old scarecrow leaned sideways, half decayed, its arms sagging like a drunk after a long night. My father and I used to plant here, she said. Tomatoes, beans, sweet potatoes when we were lucky. Tiao crouched, ran his fingers through the cracked earth. It could be good again. If someone gave it enough sweat, she said. I've got plenty of that. They worked side by side for hours. Kabia's braid fell loose and swung across her shoulders as she dug. Tiao stripped to his undershirt, his back browning further in the sun. The boys brought them water and took turns pulling weeds. Even Naza tried to help, carrying pebbles in her tiny fists and dropping them at their feet like treasures. By midday, they had cleared most of the plot. Kabia wiped her forehead and sat down, breathing heavy. I forgot what it feels like to sweat for something other than fear, she said. Tayo handed her a gourd of water. Feels like purpose. She drank and nodded. It does. That evening, after the children were asleep and the wind cooled the dirt, Kabia stepped outside with a small basket in her hands. She walked out to the garden they had just cleared, knelt in the dark, and began to scatter seeds. Tiao watched from the porch, arms crossed. You're planting already? He asked. She looked up. You have to plant when the ground is ready. Not when you're ready. Tiao took that in. Then slowly walked over, knelt beside her, and reached into the basket. Together they planted rows, careful, intentional, quiet. It wasn't just seeds they were burying. It was everything they'd carried: fear, grief, old names, old wounds. Each handful of soil they covered was a vow to stay, to try to grow. When they finished, Kabia wiped her hands and stood. You don't owe me anything. But you deserve something better than running, she said, echoing what she'd told him days ago. I know, he replied. That's why I'm still here. A breeze stirred the trees. Somewhere far off, an owl called. Kabia turned to Tiao and said, If this land feeds us, we survive. If it thrives, we build. But we don't get there unless we fight for it. I'll fight. For the land. He shook his head. For you. Her breath caught for a moment. Then she turned toward the house. Come on. It's late. But as she walked ahead, Tiao remained for just a second longer, staring down at the earth beneath his feet. The seeds were in the soil now, and war or not, he would see them grow. The next morning the sky was gray. Not storm gray, smoke gray. And when Tiao stepped outside and smelled burning from the ridge, he didn't hesitate. Kabia, he shouted. She burst through the door. The wind shifted. Ash floated down like dead snow. Zé Balbino had made his move, and it started with fire. The wind carried fire like it carried rumor, fast, reckless, and cruel. By the time Tiao reached the ridge, the hillside was already burning. Flames clawed their way through dry brush, swallowing thorns and shrubs, spitting black smoke into the sky. Trees cracked like bone under pressure. The smoke smelled of resin, soil, and vengeance. Kabia stood behind him, jaw-clenched, scarf pulled over her mouth. Her eyes didn't water, not because the smoke wasn't strong, but because she refused to let it take anything from her, not even tears. That field doesn't touch our boundary, Tiao said. Not yet, Kabia pointed. If the wind shifts west, it will. Tiao scanned the fire line. It was too clean, too precise. This wasn't lightning. This wasn't accident. This was set, he growled. Kabia's voice was flat. Zay's handwriting, all over it. They didn't wait for the fire to come to them. Kabia barked orders to Dito and Neko, sending them to fetch buckets and fill barrels. Tiao ran for the shovel and axe, already planning where they'd dig fire breaks. The old trough by the barn, long unused, was dragged out and filled. Even my Jurema arrived uninvited, but not unwelcome, with sacks of wet burlap. Put these on the roof, she said. The wind brings more than ash. As the sun dropped lower, the smoke thickened. Ash floated like snow, settling on their skin-hair shoulders. Tian worked like a man possessed, sweat and soot blurring together. Kabia kept pace with him, her braids soaked from dunking it in the water barrel. They dug trenches. They soaked the fence posts. They covered the garden with tarps. The newly planted seeds would suffocate, maybe die, but fire would not take them without a fight. By nightfall, the flames were at the far edge of their land, glowing like a second horizon. And the wind turned west. When the fire reached the old shed on the border of Kabia's property, the dry boards lit up like kindling. Flames leapt high, embers spun in circles, and the heat rolled over them like a second sun. Neko screamed as sparks caught the edge of a blanket near the coop. Tiao doused it, then threw his body over the barrel to smother the flames. His shirt singed skin, stung lungs burned, but he didn't stop. Kabia moved like she had a map of the chaos in her head. She covered windows, shoved wet cloth into cracks in the doors, barked instructions even when no one answered. At one point, she turned to Tiao and shouted over the roar. "If the house catches—" "It won't," he yelled back. "If it does, you get the children and run. I said it won't." But Kabia wasn't a fool. She knew what fire could take, and she wasn't ready to lose everything. Then, as if nature heard her defiance, the wind dropped. Not completely, but enough. Enough to shift the fire east where it burned out of grass and into rock. Enough to let them breathe without coughing. Enough to make the flames lose interest in Kabia's land. It wasn't over, but it wasn't death either. By dawn, the fire was mostly ash, smoldering piles where brush had once stood. A few trees glowed with quiet embers. The shed was gone. The coop was blackened, but the animals had survived. The garden was covered in soot, but intact. The house stood. Kabia didn't collapse from exhaustion until she knew the last coal had died. Tiao found her sitting on the porch, head bowed, arms trembling. He knelt beside her. "You did it. You saved it." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm tired, Tiao. I don't mean tonight. I mean in my bones." He looked at her, saw past the strength into the cracks beneath. "I know. This land was never easy," she said, "but at least it was mine. Now every corner feels like a warning." He reached out, touched her hand. "That's what he wants, for you to fear your own soil." "I don't fear it," she said. "I fear the cost of keeping it." She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked afraid. Not of fire, not of Zay, but of the choice that stood ahead of them both. "I planted something with you," she said. "Not just seeds. You know that." "I do. And now I have to ask. Can I keep you here? Can I ask you to stay? To fight again and again for something that might never be safe?" Tiao didn't hesitate. "Yes. You can ask. And I'll say yes. Every time." She blinked once and it was like a dam breaking. "I won't lose another home," she whispered. "Then you won't," he said. "Because now it's mine too." Later, after the children were fed and asleep, and after Kabia finally lay down, Tiao sat watch on the porch axe beside him. Mai Jurema joined him just before midnight, her cane tapping softly. "He's not finished," she said. "I know. But now he knows something else." "What's that she's not alone anymore? That if he wants this land, he'll have to bleed for it?" Tiao nodded. "I'm ready." Mai Jurema sniffed the air. The fire didn't take the house, didn't take the girl. But it took something else. "What doubt?" she said. "From her. From you." Tiao didn't reply. He just watched the stars, hand resting on the handle of his axe. At sunrise, Kabia joined him wrapped in a shawl, eyes rimmed with fatigue, but burning with clarity. "We rebuild today," she said. "Even if it's just one nail, where do we start?" She pointed to the edge of the garden. The tarps had protected most of the seedlings, but the edge rows were blackened, some sprouts crisped to husks. "We plant again," she said. Tayao looked at the destroyed corner. So soon, her voice was firm. "You only plant when the ground is ready, and nothing is more ready than what's survived the fire." That afternoon, Dito came running from the road. "Someone's coming." "Horse not fast, just one rider." Kabia and Tiao exchanged a look. Not panic, just readiness. Kabia stepped forward, her voice steady. "Whoever it is, we don't hide." And they didn't. They stood side by side in the clearing as the rider came closer. A man, thin-weathered, not Zay, but his coat bore a sheriff's badge, worn but visible. He stopped a few feet away, raised a hand. "I'm not here for trouble," he said. "Heard about the fire. Heard about Zay." Kabia's face didn't flinch, and the sheriff dismounted. "And I've got questions. A lot of them. Folks are talking. Lines are being drawn. People want justice." Tiao stepped forward. "So do we." The sheriff studied them both. "Then maybe we start talking about what justice really means around here." Kabia looked to Tiao, and Tiao said the words that marked the true beginning of their fight then. "Talk fast. Because we're done running. This land's worth staying for." "I came to ask questions, but I'm leaving with more than answers," the sheriff said. "I'm leaving with a warning Zay's not acting alone anymore." Kabia didn't blink. She stood with her arms crossed, the morning sun hardening the lines in her face. Tiao beside her didn't flinch either. The children peeked from behind the doorway, quiet and tense. The sheriff dismounted and leaned against the porch post. "There's talk in town," he said. "Zay's been whispering in the ears of folks who've got nothing but time and grudges. Says you've been stealing land. Says you're hoarding water." Kabia's laugh was sharp. "He's welcome to come take a drink if he thinks that well's magic." The sheriff shook his head. "He's poisoning minds. The kind of talk that turns crowds ugly real fast. And the worst part." He paused, then looked them in the eye. "Some of them believe it." Tiao stepped forward. "What's your part in this, sheriff? Warnings or justice?" The sheriff didn't answer right away. "Justice is a hard thing out here. Law's only as strong as the people backing it. And lately Zay's backing's louder than mine." Kabia narrowed her eyes. "So you're saying if they come with torches, we're on our own?" "I'm saying," the sheriff replied carefully. "You've got a window to prepare. After that, I can't promise anything." He tipped his hat, then mounted again. "Just know, When men like Zay gather company, they don't come to talk. He rode off, dust trailing behind him like smoke. Kabia and Tiao stood there in silence for a moment. Then Kabia said, "We don't need promises. We need strategy." That afternoon, they made a plan. They reinforced the doors with planks scavenged from the old shed. Tiao set snares in the brush lines and posted lookout points along the trail into the clearing. Kabia buried jars of water and dried cassava beneath the floorboards. Not out of panic, but from experience. Her father had taught her that the worst always came when you stopped expecting it. They trained the boys not to fight, but to move fast. Neko learned how to signal with mirrors. Daito practiced leading Naza to the root cellar behind the house. Every hour became a drill, every breeze a question. And in between, they still worked the land. Because Kabia refused to stop living. She sowed new beans beside the damaged rows. She taught Dito how to cut saplings for stakes. Even when her hands trembled at night from exhaustion, she kept a journal of everything they did, what grew, what failed, where the birds nested, where water collected. As if recording life would help protect it. Tiao watched her with awe. He'd seen people survive before. But Kabia wasn't just surviving. She was daring life to take her down. One evening as they sat on the porch, Tiao handed her a folded scrap of cloth. "What's this?" she asked. He unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small silver ring. "It was my mother's," he said. "I kept it hidden since Zinha left. Couldn't bear to look at it. But now..." He took a breath. "I want you to have it. Not for marriage, not yet, but as a promise." Kabia stared at the ring like it was a spark in her hand. "What kind of promise that I'm not going anywhere?" Tiao said. "Even if this ends badly. Even if Zay brings an army. I'll fight beside you. And if we win, we build something new." Kabia closed the cloth, cradled it in her palm, and said nothing for a long while. Finally, she whispered, "You plant seeds and don't know if they'll sprout, but you still plant them. That's what this feels like." He smiled. "Exactly." That night, the stars were unusually bright. Mai Jurema appeared at dusk with 3 bundles of sage and a stern look. "Light these before midnight," she said. "Smoke speaks louder than words. Let the land know you still believe in it." Kabia didn't question her. She lit the sage. Tiao walked the borders with 1 bundle waving smoke into the trees. Dito followed with another, serious and proud. When morning came, the air smelled not of ash, but of something cleaner. Hope, maybe. But peace never lingers long on land where greed grows. 2 days later, just as Tiao finished chopping wood near the barn, a sound split the air. The sharp metallic bang of a shot fired into the sky. Kabia ran from the house, Neko clinging to her skirt. Tiao grabbed the axe and turned toward the road. A group of 6 men stood at the edge of the clearing. Zay was in front. No smile this time, just teeth. "This is your last warning," he called. "You leave now, we let you go. Stay, and we take it all." Kabia stepped forward. "You already tried fire. Now you try fear." Zay lifted the rifle in his hand and pointed it at the sky. "I don't have to try fear. I just have to wait. The town's with me now. Sheriff won't lift a finger. You're done." Tiao walked beside Kabia, axe still in hand. "You've already lost," he said. Zay laughed. "Oh yeah. How do you figure?" Tiao didn't blink. "Because you came here with men who needed convincing. I can see it in their faces. They're not here for justice. They're here for something they were promised. Gold land." "What did you sell them?" Zay's smirk faltered. Kabia stepped forward. You think this is yours, but it never was. This land doesn't answer to threats. It answers to roots. And ours run deep now. One of Zay's men shifted his weight uneasily. Another lowered his rifle slightly. Kabia saw it. So did Tiao. You walk away now, she said, and maybe the land lets you leave clean. Stay and it swallows you. Zay raised the rifle again, but something had shifted. His men no longer looked like an army. They looked like people beginning to ask the right questions. Last chance, Zay barked. Kabia didn't move. This land was born of fire. If you think flame scares us, you don't understand what it means to belong. Zay didn't fire. Instead, he spat in the dirt and turned. This ain't over. He walked off. 2 men followed immediately. The rest hesitated, then left too. By the time the dust settled, Kabia and Tiao stood alone again. But something in the air had changed. The wind no longer carried smoke. It carried weight. And far off in the direction Zay had gone, a new reckoning was stirring. The town wasn't done choosing sides. Justice was coming, but not from a badge. From the people. And Kabia was ready. There's more power in standing your ground than swinging your fists, Kabia said, her voice low, but certain as she stirred the morning pot of coffee. The house was still quiet, the children not yet awake. Tiao stood near the window, watching the edge of the clearing where Zay had last stood 2 days ago. The memory of the rifle, the threats and the shifting loyalty in the eyes of Zay's men still hung in the air like dust that refused to settle. Tiao turned to her. You think they'll come back? I know they will. Not all of them. But the ones who think pride is worth more than truth. He poured water into a basin and splashed his face as if washing off the weight of waiting. Then we stay ready. Kabia nodded, but there was something different in her expression today. Not fear, not fire. Focus. A sharpened clarity like someone who had spent a lifetime preparing for a test she now knew had finally arrived. They finished breakfast in silence, the kind of silence that understood everything, didn't need to be said out loud. By mid-morning, word had reached them. An old man named Ciro arrived from town riding a mule with a crooked gait. He wasn't a talker, but the moment Kabia stepped out, he handed her a folded note and muttered, "You're not alone anymore." The note was unsigned, just a few words in firm handwriting. Zay's called a meeting. He's making claims. If you want the land to speak, you need to speak louder. Kabia stared at the paper, then handed it to Tiao. He read it, mouth tightening. Meeting, he asked. Town hall, she said. He's going to try and make it official, paint us as squatters, agitators, outsiders. Tiao folded the note slowly. Then we go. Kabia hesitated. It's a risk. Everything is. But if we don't show up, we let him tell the story for us. They packed what they needed: water cloths for the children's faces, a pouch of dried fruit and cassava in case the ride back ran long. My Jurema agreed to stay behind with Dito Neko and Naza Old Bones still bite, she said, brandishing her walking stick. The ride to town took over 2 hours under the blazing sun. When they arrived, the town square was already humming. People leaned against buildings, fanned themselves under porch roofs, murmured in tight knots. Suspicion hung over them like storm clouds. Tiao held Kabia's hand tightly as they dismounted and walked toward the old grain barn now used as a hall. The doors were open, the room packed. At the front stood Zay Balbino, chest puffed, one hand on a wooden podium like he owned it. Kabia stepped in shoulders, squared, eyes steady. Zay paused mid-sentence when he saw her. Well, he said loud enough for all to hear, look who decided to join us. Thought you'd keep hiding in the brush. I don't hide, Kabia said, her voice slicing through the murmurs like a blade. I build. Zay gestured to the crowd. You all know what's happening. These two, they've claimed land that don't belong to them. They're strangers. Squatters. Tiao stepped forward. I was born 2 valleys over. My family worked this land before your father knew how to hold a plow. And Kabia Zay sneered was promised to my family through a debt her father never paid. Kabia stepped up beside Tiao. My father owed no one his daughter's life, and I owe no one mine. A murmur rolled through the room. The town elder, Senor Damasio, raised a hand for quiet. His voice, though aged, still held weight. We didn't gather for shouts. We gathered for facts. Kabia reached into her satchel and pulled out a stack of yellowed papers tied with a strip of leather. She handed them to Damasio. My father kept every document. Proof of the land's purchase. Proof of the taxes we paid, even when the rains failed. It's all there. Zay stepped forward, trying to peer over the elder's shoulder. That don't mean anything. Paper can be forged. But history cannot, Kabia said. You all know this land. You know who planted the fig trees near the stream, who dug the first well. That was my family. Another voice spoke up from the crowd, a man named Jonas who once bought goats from Kabia's father. I remember that well. I helped dig it. That was 20 years back. Then a woman added, my husband laid the first fence post with her father. That land was theirs long before Zay started sniffing around it. Zay's face darkened. Kabia pressed on. This land doesn't just belong to the ones who scream loudest. It belongs to those who work it, who bleed into it, who feed their children with its soil. Tiao turned to the crowd. We didn't come here to fight, but we won't be stolen from either. Damasio looked over the documents, then spoke slowly. These are real. Stamped. Signed. Old but clear. He turned to Zay. You've made noise, but noise isn't proof. Zay's jaw worked furiously. She still owes me. That land was promised. Kabia didn't flinch. You can't inherit a woman's body like you inherit a shovel, Zay. I wasn't promised. I was threatened, and I said no. Gasps fluttered through the room, not of disbelief, but of recognition. Whispers turned. People exchanged looks. A line had been drawn. Damasio finally said, this matter's closed. The land is hers. Zay's hand twitched toward his belt where a knife hung loosely. Tiao stepped in front of Kabia, immediately eyes locked on him. You draw, Tiao said, and you won't leave upright. But Zay didn't draw. Not today. Instead, he stormed out, slamming the door wide as he went. The air behind him felt charged, but also lighter, like something had broken free. Kabia exhaled slowly. Outside, the crowd began to disperse. Some tipped hats to her, some just nodded. But none looked away anymore. They rode home in silence, tired but upright. The sun dipped low behind the trees as their house came into view, still standing, smoke-free, peaceful for once. When they reached the porch, Mai Urema met them with a smirk. So she said, You spoke louder, Kabia smiled. No, I just spoke true. And for the first time in months, she believed it was enough. You can win the land in court, but you don't own peace until the fear is gone. Kabia said it quietly, almost to herself, as she turned the soil in the garden bed. The roots of her new okra plants had started to catch. Life had dared to grow again, but her hands were tense, her eyes distant. She wasn't speaking of vegetables. Tiao heard her from the porch. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he ran the whetstone along the machete he'd been cleaning all morning, the same tool he'd used to cut back the thorn bushes on the southern edge. The same one he would not hesitate to use again if Zay returned. 3 days had passed since the town meeting. The legal fight was over. Her name was on the documents. The land was officially hers. But no one believed Zay would let that be the final word. Kabia hadn't let her guard down. Neither had Tiao. The days were calm, but in that thick, breath-held way that made even the birds sing quieter. Later that afternoon, Dito came running down from the ridge. Riders, he shouted. 3 of them, coming slow. Kabia was already standing before he reached the fence line. Tiao grabbed the machete, but Kabia put a hand on his arm. "No blades until we know who they are," she said. "We don't start what we can't finish." The riders came into view, older men, rough-faced, but not threatening. One of them raised a hand as they approached. "We come in peace," he called out. Tiao didn't lower the machete. "Words are cheap lately." The man dismounted and took off his hat. "Name's Adelio. We were part of Zay's crew, until last week." Kabia narrowed her eyes. "Why now?" Adelio shifted, embarrassed. "That meeting, the way you stood your ground, it made some of us realize we've been backing the wrong man. And you just come to tell us that—" He looked her in the eye. "We came to warn you. Zay's gathering new men, outsiders, the kind that don't ask questions. He's still talking like that land's his, but now he's done waiting for signatures. He's planning something well." Kabia didn't flinch. "When soon? Not days. Maybe hours." Tiao stepped forward. "What are you doing here then, trying to stop something worse?" Adelio said. "Some of us, we want to make this right." Kabia studied him. His face was lined with years of sun and maybe guilt. Behind him, the other 2 men looked just as tired. Not of work, of shame. "You want to help?" she asked. He nodded. "Then stay," she said. "Because when he comes, I'm done defending. This time we push back." By dusk, the land was alive with movement. Adelio and the other 2 set traps near the back trail. Tiao showed them the hidden paths behind the barn. Kabia handed out every spare tool that could be used as a weapon. Even Dito was given a slingshot and a pouch of stones. They didn't have guns, but they had numbers, heart, and a home worth protecting. Mai Jurema lit more sage and walked the property line barefoot, whispering words older than the town itself. By midnight, the land was silent. The animals were restless. Even the goats stood near the house, drawn by something in the air, as if the land itself knew this was the night. Then just before dawn, the dogs barked. Kabia was already up. She moved to the window rifle in hand. It was old single shot, more for show than anything, but it made her feel steady. Tiao joined her at the door, machete across his back. Shapes moved in the dark. 5, 6, maybe more. Quiet. Armed. Kabia turned to Tiao. "This ends tonight." He nodded. "One way or another." Outside, Zay's voice cut through the darkness like a whip. "Still playing Queen of the Ashes, I see." Kabia stepped out into the yard, standing just beyond the reach of the porch light. "I thought you'd send dogs," she said. "But you came yourself." Zay stepped forward. He was leaner than before, angrier. Eyes bloodshot. He held a pistol now, not the rifle. Easier to draw. "I came to finish it," he said. "Law's too slow. Fire didn't work. Now we do it the old way." Tiao stepped beside her. "You sure you want to do this?" Zay grinned. You gonna stop me run away? Kabia raised her voice so the whole clearing could hear. This land is mine. The town knows it. The law knows it. The earth itself knows it. The only one too blind to see is you. Zay's fingers twitched. But then movement. Adelio and the two men Kabia had welcomed came from the shadows, weapons raised. Behind them Jonas and a few more townsfolk Kabia hadn't expected to see. You're outnumbered, Zay Adelio said. Zay froze. This ain't your land, Jonas added. A man who burns homes and threatens children don't get to talk about heritage. Zay looked around. The numbers had shifted. He wasn't leading anymore, he was cornered. You all gonna follow a woman, he spat. A woman who feeds us. Protects us, Adelio said. You just take. Zay raised the pistol. Just an inch. And Tiao stepped forward. If you shoot, he said, voice hard as iron, I promise you won't lift your hand again. The two men stared at each other. Then Kabia spoke the words that broke whatever power Zay thought he had left. You came for a war, but all you're leaving with is proof you lost. Zay's hand trembled, then dropped. He turned. No words, no pride. He left. The others followed, some quickly, some with shame in their eyes. Kabia stood still until every shadow was gone. Then she exhaled. Tiao turned to her eyes wide. It's over. No, she said. It's just beginning. They had the land, the law, the loyalty, but now they had to rebuild something bigger than fences or gardens. They had to rebuild trust, and that was a war all its own. The real victory isn't when they leave, it's when we stop bracing for them to come back. Kabia spoke the words as she laid the first brick of the new shed. Her hands were rough and blistered, the sun beating down on her back, but she didn't stop. Tiao was beside her shirt, damp with sweat, hammer in hand. The others worked nearby, Adelio, Jonas, even two young boys from the town, who'd come to help after hearing what had happened. Zay was gone. Really gone. He'd ridden out of the valley with nothing but curses in his mouth and shame on his face. No one had followed him. No one had spoken in his defense. And no one expected him to return. But peace wasn't a visitor that came just because the threat had left. Peace had to be built, like everything else here, with effort, with sweat, with hope measured in labor. So they built. The fire line had left scars. The northern fence was still burned through in places. The coop was functional but fragile. The back shed had collapsed during a recent windstorm, and the children had been sleeping too close to the front door in case they had to run again. Kabia wanted more for them now. I don't want my children sleeping near exits anymore, she'd told Tiao that morning. I want them to sleep in the center of the house, at peace. And so began the rebuilding. The town sent what it could, nails, extra wood sacks of grain, even a small window someone had stored away for years. Mai Jurema organized deliveries and cleaned tools while the others worked. The scent of her herbal oils mixed with the smell of sweat and sawdust, strange and grounding. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, bruised and hungry, but whole. Dito played quiet tunes on a handmade flute, and Neko carved shapes from bark with a dull knife Tiao had given him. Naza had taken to following Kabia everywhere, her tiny footsteps mimicking her every move. It had only been a week since Zay's final stand, but something new was blooming in the silence he left behind, not just safety, but possibility. Still, the wound was fresh. Kabia knew that just because Zay was gone didn't mean the fear had vanished. Fear lingered. It waited at the edge of sleep. It whispered when the wind blew wrong. It asked, what if he comes back? That was the fight now, not with men, but with memory. You sleep, Tiao asked one night as they lay in bed, her back against his chest, both of them too wired for rest. Not yet, she said. He kissed her shoulder. You ever think about leaving? She hesitated. Only once. The day my father died. What stopped you? He whispered something right before the end. He said, this land remembers who stays. I didn't want to be forgotten. Tiao nodded against her hair. You won't be. Not by me. She turned to face him, hand on his chest. And what do you want, Tiao, to wake up and not feel like I have to fight? To walk this land and think about tomorrow instead of surviving today? Kabia smiled softly. Then let's plant tomorrow. The next morning, she took him to a part of the property he hadn't seen yet, a narrow patch of soil shaded by tamarind trees. The ground was soft, dark, and fragrant. This was my mother's garden, she said. She used to say the earth here was the kindest in the valley. Tiao knelt and ran his hand through it. It feels like bread dough. Kabia laughed. Exactly. Let's plant something that feeds more than bellies. They chose flowers, marigold, hibiscus, and a few wild seeds Kabia had stored away for years. As they worked, the children joined in, and soon the garden looked like it was waking from a long sleep. It wasn't just beauty they were planting. It was defiance. It was joy. Later that day, Adelio arrived with news. The town council had officially recorded Kabia as the landowner in the public registry. No contest, no caveats. It's done, he said, holding out the stamped papers. Kabia held them like they were something sacred. Tiao clapped Adelio on the shoulder. You sticking around? The older man shrugged. I've got nowhere else I want to be. If you'll have me. Kabia nodded. Then help us build something worth staying for. That night, a feast. Nothing grand, just stew bread and a few jugs of sugarcane liquor passed around in chipped clay cups. But it felt like a holiday. Laughter came easy. No one looked over their shoulder. And when the fire cracked, no one jumped. Kabia stood at the head of the table, her arms crossed, eyes shining. I've spent years preparing for war, she said. But this is the first night I've prepared for peace. Cheers, glasses raised. Even my Jurema smiled. When the stars came out, Tiao pulled Kabia aside. There's something I've been meaning to do, he said. She arched a brow. That's so. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the same silver ring he'd offered her weeks before. But this time, he said, it's not just a promise. It's a question. Kabia stared at him. I'm not asking for ceremony, he continued. I'm asking for roots. You and me planted deep. She didn't say anything at first. Then she took the ring, slid it onto her finger, and said simply, we already started growing. They didn't make announcements. No big declarations. Just a quiet knowing passed between them like a torch, handed from one hand to another. The next morning, the first flower in her mother's garden bloomed. Bright red. Bold. Naza pointed and squealed. Look, Kabia knelt and touched the petal gently. Do you know what that is? She asked the little girl. Naza shook her head. It's a sign, Kabia said, that even after fire things can grow. The chapter of war was closed, but the work wasn't over. They still had fences to mend, soil to test, trust to build with the rest of the valley. The town would watch them closely, waiting to see if this new peace would last. But for now, the sky was clear. The land was quiet. And Kabia finally stopped bracing. She breathed deep, looked over the stretch of green that had once almost been lost, and let herself believe in something bigger than survival. She believed in tomorrow. Sometimes healing isn't quiet. Sometimes it sounds like wood being split, babies crying, and laughter all at once. The sound of new life echoed across the land. It began with a hammer strike, then another, and then the unmistakable cry of a newborn carried across the breeze like a hymn. Kabia stood in the doorway of the nearly finished cabin they were building for Adelio. She wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist and turned her head toward the house. Tiao was already halfway there, moving fast but steady. "She's early," Kabia muttered, and dropped the hammer. Inside, Dita, the young woman who had arrived just weeks ago, belly round and eyes wary, was in labor. They'd taken her in after her father cast her out, blaming her for the shame of carrying a child without a husband. Kabia hadn't asked questions. She simply made up the cot in the storage room and brought warm food every night. Now that child was arriving. Kabia entered the house to find Mai Jurema standing at the foot of the cot. Sleeves rolled, hands, calm, voice even. "Boil more water," she said. "Tiao, take the boys outside. This room needs quiet." Tiao hesitated, eyes flicking to Kabia. "She's fine," Kabia said. "This isn't her first storm." He nodded and ushered the boys out. Kabia knelt beside Dita, who clutched the thin blanket and whimpered between breaths. "You're doing good," Kabia whispered. "You're almost there." Dita looked up at her, fear and pain flooding her face. "I can't. It hurts too much." Kabia took her hand. "Everything worth bringing into the world hurts first. Keep going." Minutes stretched like rope pulled too tight. Then all at once there it was, a cry, sharp and new and alive. Mai Jurema lifted the baby with practiced grace. "Girl," she announced. "Strong one." Dita sobbed. Kabia exhaled and felt something in her chest ease, not just the tension of the moment, but something older, heavier. When Tiao came in, he stood in the doorway, watching with a quiet awe Kabia had come to recognize. It was the look of a man not used to soft things, letting himself believe in them anyway. Later, as the sun began to dip low and orange spilled across the field, Kabia and Tiao sat beneath the tamarind tree. She named her Rosa, Kabia said, still holding the warmth of that moment. "Good name," Tiao replied. "Roots and thorns." Kabia smiled faintly. She asked if we'd let her stay. "Raise Rosa here. Help with the crops. And you said I told her this land isn't just for those who bled for it. It's for those who tend it." Tiao nodded, then leaned back against the trunk. "You ever think this would happen, all this? A home full of noise and babies and strangers becoming family?" Kabia didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out over the garden, now blooming in full. Wildflowers tangled with the vegetables. The fig tree had sprouted new leaves. Even the burnt edges of the north field had begun to heal. "I hoped," she said. "But hope's not a plan. We made this happen with our hands." Tiao reached over and laced his fingers with hers. "It's not perfect." "No," Kabia said. "But it's ours." The next morning, the town sent word a small festival would be held in 2 days to honor the harvest and those who helped defend the valley. Kabia was named guest of honor. The idea made her uneasy. "I don't need a festival," she said. "It's not about need," Tiao replied. "It's about being seen." She didn't answer, but the next day she bathed Naza in the good basin and let Dita braid her hair. It had been a long time since anyone braided Kabia's hair. The act felt sacred. When the festival day arrived, they dressed in their cleanest clothes. Kabia wore the dress her mother had sewn before passing plain blue with faded embroidery along the collar. Tian wore a patched shirt and boots scuffed from months of work, but he stood tall. The town square was transformed. Lanterns hung between trees. A table of food stretched half the block. Children ran barefoot through the dust sticky with sugarcane candy and honeyed bread. When Kabia arrived, people parted like water. There was silence, not cold, not judgment, but reverence. Then someone clapped, and another, and then the entire square erupted in applause. Kabia froze for a breath, stunned. But Tiao touched her elbow gently, grounding her. "She sees us," someone shouted. She stayed. She fought for more than herself. She fed us when Zay would have let us starve. Kabia swallowed hard. Her throat ached with unshed tears. Then from the crowd, old Señor Damasio stepped forward with a weathered box. "For your house," he said, and opened it. Inside a brass nameplate. Engraved were the words, "Terra Firma Kabia's Homestead." She didn't speak. She just nodded and accepted it with both hands. Later, while the music played and children danced, Kabia sat on the edge of the well with Tiao. "Did we win?" she asked. Tiao considered that. "We're still here," he said. "That's more than a win." She nodded slowly. "But I still feel it. That pull. Like I'm waiting for something bad to come." He didn't rush to reassure her. Instead, he said, "Then let's make enough good that it drowns the waiting." Kabia looked up at the night sky, stars sharp and endless. The baby Rosa was asleep on Dita's chest. The boys chased each other through the firelight. Jurema danced with someone younger than her by 40 years, cackling like a girl. Healing wasn't quiet. It was noisy, messy, and beautiful. She leaned into Tiao. "Maybe we didn't survive the fire just to rebuild," she said. "Maybe we survived to become something stronger." He kissed her temple. "I think we already have." And in the distance behind the rhythm of drums and the flicker of lanterns, the land settled. Not in silence, but in strength. Rain fell for the first time in weeks. It wasn't violent. Not the kind that rips through trees or floods the valley. It came soft like a blessing, whispered on the wind, soaking the red earth and dusting the fields in silver. Kabia stood barefoot in it, eyes closed, face tilted to the sky. Water ran down her cheeks and hair soaking her dress, but she didn't move. Behind her, Tiao and the children stepped out onto the porch, silent, reverent. Even Jurema came to the doorway, lips parted, watching as if the rain were a long-lost spirit returning home. This land had burned. It had been bruised, buried under ash, threatened by greed, nearly taken by force. And yet it endured. Kabia opened her eyes and looked out over everything they had rebuilt, the garden blooming in wild tangles, the repaired fences strong and straight, the house patched and painted. Even the old goat shed had a new roof. But it was more than structures. It was the way Dita now laughed freely, holding Rosa tight to her chest while planning the next planting season. The way Adelio greeted each morning with purpose, rising early to feed the animals and whistle old cowboy tunes. The way Neko had stopped hiding when strangers visited and Dito spoke of becoming a teacher. Even little Naza, who once clung to Kabia's skirts in fear, now ran headfirst through puddles chasing frogs and joy like they were hers by birthright. And they were. Kabia turned to Tiao, who was watching her, the way he always did, like she was the answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. "It smells like my childhood," she said, smiling, "like wet roots and tamarind leaves." Tiao stepped into the rain, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. You miss it. Before all this, she shook her head. No, I don't miss the silence. I don't miss holding my breath every night. He kissed her temple. Then we built right. They stayed there for a while, letting the rain baptize them. It didn't just wash the dust from their skin, it softened the years they had spent hardening themselves to survive. Later inside, Kabia dried Naza's hair by the fire and sang an old lullaby her mother used to hum. Rosa was already asleep in Dita's arms. Tiao brought out a small tin of dried beans and sat with Adelio sorting them for next season's planting. Everything felt simple, but behind every quiet moment was a storm they had survived, and somehow that gave it more weight, more meaning. That evening, as the rain continued to patter gently on the roof, Kabia sat down with her journal, a habit she had picked up again since the day the baby was born. Not for poetry or memory, but to trace her thoughts before they scattered. Tonight, she wrote, "We lost so much, but we never lost each other. That's the only reason we still have anything at all." She paused, then continued. It wasn't the land that needed saving. It was us. Our hearts. Our hope. This place gave us the fight, but we gave it meaning. We watered the roots. We dared to stay. When she finished, she closed the book, tied the leather strap, and placed it beneath the hearthstone where it would stay until someone else needed to remember. The next day, Tiao took the boys fishing. Kabia and Dita repaired the chicken coop. Mai Jurema taught Naza how to dry herbs for tea, and by evening the porch smelled like rosemary and sweet mint. It had been almost a year since Kabia had stood at the edge of the road, with a crying baby in her arms, staring into a horizon that had seemed as cruel as it was endless. Now every path led home. Still, she knew the world outside their fence hadn't changed. There would always be men like Zebalbino. There would be droughts and storms and seasons where the earth gave nothing back. But Kabia had learned something no one could take away. Strength didn't come from fighting. It came from planting again and again, even after loss. One night, Tiao returned from town with something behind his back. Kabia raised an eyebrow. "You bring me a pig," he laughed. Close. He revealed a small, carved wooden sign. Painted on it were the words, "Welcome to Terra Firme." Beneath it, in smaller letters, "If you're hungry, we'll feed you. If you're tired, we'll make you a bed. But if you're here to take what isn't yours, turn back now." Kabia laughed loud and full, then hung the sign right by the gate. It swung in the breeze like a quiet sentinel. In the weeks that followed, they hosted their first communal harvest. Families came from across the valley. They brought fruits, grains, cheese music. The children played until the stars rose. The elders told stories of how things used to be. And for the first time, those stories didn't sound like warnings. They sounded like memories meant to be built upon. Kabia sat with Mai Jurema, their chairs pulled close together. The old woman sipped tea, eyes scanning the horizon. "You've done something rare," she said. Kabia looked at her. "What's that? You took a wound and made it into a window." Kabia said nothing, just reached for her hand and held it. Later, when the guests had gone and the lanterns flickered low, Tiao and Kabia stood at the gate, the sign swinging gently above them. "You think it'll last?" he asked. Kabia thought for a long time. "I think everything ends," she said. "But not everything breaks. This might bend. It might shake. But we made it out of more than nails and will." She leaned into him. "We made it out of each other." Tiao nodded, eyes scanning the land. Then let's keep making. As the night deepened, the house behind them glowed with soft light. Inside, a baby cried, laughter echoed from the kitchen, and the rhythm of footsteps told a story older than fear. Kabia took one last breath of the rain-sweet air. Then she stepped inside into the life she had fought for, into the peace they had earned, not by force but by choosing again and again not to leave, not to surrender, to stay. And in staying, they had rewritten what the land could mean. For family, for legacy, for love. And maybe for the first time in generations, the land was listening back.